talk a little bit about handling the crisis and other matters, especially from a political standpoint. And now there's talk. Joe Biden yesterday was on the Sunday shows talking about the possibility, prospect of a virtual convention for the Democrats. What are we to make of all these different machinations? I'm very excited to welcome for the first time to Jimmy at the Crossroads, B Stoddard, who's an associate editor and columnist at RealClearPolitics. And of course, you've seen her many a time on the Fox News channel. She joins us here today. AB, welcome. Good to have you.
Nice to be with you, Jimmy.
Thank you so much for taking the time. So I just want to play a clip here to help set the stage, talk for a few minutes about the coronavirus pandemic. In Cut 7, this is President Donald Trump yesterday at his coronavirus press conference talking about what will happen in the coming weeks.
All of us are going to be working very hard. We're working very hard. We are really coming up into a time that's going to be very horrendous, probably a time like we haven't seen in this country, wouldn't you say? I mean, I don't think we've seen a time like this in the country. And we're getting to that point where it's going to really be some very bad numbers. We want to keep those numbers a lot lower than they would have been, and we will do that. We have tremendous talent working. We have tremendous people, and that includes governors. That includes everybody. Everybody's working. But unfortunately, we're getting to that time when the numbers are going to peak, and it's not going to be a good-looking situation. I really believe we probably have never seen anything like these kind of numbers, maybe during the war, during a World War I or II or something, but this is a war.
I have to say that this is strong language coming from the President of the United States talking about horrendous in terms of what we're going to see. Now, was that just the stark reality, or should the president maybe have phrased things a little differently to be more encouraging to the American people?
Well, I think, Jimmy, at times the scientists have made it clear that the president has been a little too hopeful in a lot of his estimations and assessments about prospective therapeutic medicines and timelines and numbers, social distancing protocols. Obviously, the tape tells the truth about the way the president talked about this virus in January and February and halfway through March. So he's coming around to talk about it in grave terms to prepare the American people for a lot that could have been mitigated much earlier and a lot that could have been avoided. It's clear from the modeling that we're heading into a really bad part of peaks around the country that I think will last in some places into late April and May. And I don't know that we have a handle on what the exact numbers are. He's, of course, put the potential total death toll at between 100 and 240,000 Americans. That will depend, of course, on the social distancing that we're all exercising now and will for the weeks to come, whether or not in the 8 remaining states without shelter-in-place orders, people are going to individually take responsibility to take these precautions without direction from the Republican governors. And also it will depend on the capacity of the hospitals and whether or not they can keep the number of deaths down, because they will be besieged by infected people without the protective gear we know they desperately need and without the life-saving ventilators that they're going to need more of. New Orleans reaching its capacity this week. A lot of states have hotspots where they're worried about the number of ventilators. So I think it's overdue that the president is speaking about it in grave and serious language. I think that he still is running a government response that is a response. It's a reaction, and there is no plan at this point to contain the spread of the virus. That would demand a national testing regime or a national lockdown or both. And as of today, we have neither.
So Dr. Anthony Fauci has been the leading guy behind all this. I mean, I've called him the most trusted man in America when it comes to telling us about the specifics on this pandemic, the specifics on coronavirus, what to keep in mind, things to watch for, and so forth. And he's facing a lot of criticism. In fact, yesterday I saw #FireFauci was trending. I think it was started by some conservatives who aren't too pleased with him, and then you had liberals who were, and others who were taking it up and saying, hey, no, we shouldn't hashtag fire Fauci. Now, I'm of the mindset that it would be stupid to do so, and I don't agree with some of his policy prescriptions per se, but I think the guy knows what he's talking about. He's been around the block one or two times, and I was curious your thoughts on this idea of removing Fauci by some people who are not liking his approach, shall we say.
I think it's really ugly that allies of the president and supporters of the president have found reason to try to malign Dr. Fauci, our foremost expert in this country, really in the world. We are lucky to have him. He has advised presidents for 50 years. We don't have this kind of expertise. And as you mentioned, this kind of a trusted leader on every block. We are desperate for leadership right now. The administration cost us 2 critical months, and we're way behind the curve. Dr. Fauci said last Thursday, Jimmy, he doesn't understand why we don't have a national lockdown. And the idea of him being muzzled at the president's press conference last night, I shouldn't call it a press conference because it's not really a press conference if he can muzzle Fauci. But he wanted to obviously tout the potential of hydrochloroquine, and Dr. Fauci has been very cautious about how it needs to go through trials to be certified as an effective therapy for COVID-19. It is, as you know, a vital drug for people with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And it's worked as an anti-malarial. So the idea that we would be causing shortages for people who need it when it hasn't been proven for COVID-19 is of great concern to Dr. Fauci. But people who want to tout, the potential benefits of this drug have crowded him out online, and it's led to not only conspiracies about him, but death threats. And that's why he has a 9-agent detail now protecting him, because we have sickos in this country who have threatened to kill him.
B Stoddard joining us, associate editor at RealClearPolitics. When we look at the politics of all this, it is pretty striking to see some political swipes being taken at the president from Democrats and from Republicans to Democrats, especially when we talk about the stimulus debate and so forth, and how that played out in the previous couple of weeks. But Joe Biden, one thing that I have to give credit for Joe Biden is that he's been, when pressed, do you think that President Trump bears responsibility for the lives that have been lost in these ways? I mean, Chuck Todd last weekend had specifically asked him, does he have blood on his hands, or is that too harsh? And then Joe Biden says, I think that's too harsh. And I have to, at least on that level, while he's expressing some disagreements on some of the policy aspects with this, I'm glad that Joe Biden hasn't taken a very hard-hitting sort of political or partisan slant against President Trump. To his credit, I have to say.
Yeah, I think the former vice president is trying to make the argument that the president is incompetent, and his response at a governmental, operational, mechanical level was a debacle. The former vice president's made this clear in his ads, as you've seen. But he's not going to try to get into a political food fight right now when this is a dire story about people dying, and many people around us, Jimmy, who have not been laid off or lost their health insurance or lost loved ones, going into harm's way every day to load up the shelves of the grocery stores, work at the post office, be on the front lines in our healthcare system, and either to protect us or for fear of losing their job and having nothing left. So Joe Biden is a compassionate man, and that's what's really on his mind. He knows that the story of the Trump administration's response to this pandemic will be told all year long as we come out of flattening the curve and then again prepare for another fall, November version of a rebound of the virus as we try to create new protections for the next pandemic. That will be a time for Joe Biden to make his case that we need a more competent president at the helm next year, and that the president does not deserve re-election. But I don't think Joe Biden is going to get out there and throw out some tacky slugs at President Trump right now. He understands that people are really hurting.
One thing that we've been talking about here is I'm fine with the notion of these shutdowns. I mean, there's a lot of discomfort with it, and I have to say, I'm not on board with a national shutdown. I don't believe that the federal government should have that particular authority, but I'm not somebody who says, look, like I'm in Colorado, and we have one of these stay-at-home orders, and while I appreciate the way that Governor Polis had gone about this before issuing the stay-at-home order, I'm not, for this month of April, I'm fine with that. I get it. I understand the reasoning and the rationale, but I don't know how long this can really last beyond that because of the economic damage. It can be particularly debilitating to the economy in terms of recovering, and to be honest, I say this as a small government guy, I don't trust the government's ability to provide for those who are in need for an extended period of time on such a mass scale. I don't think the government's capable of doing that at the federal level. What do you think?
Forgive my phone for going.
That's okay. It's the world
Hold
of
on.
COVID-19. B Stoddard joining us here on the show. You're on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Here we go.
It's
So,
what happens. Okay, we've got AB. There you go.
My thoughts. I didn't want you to keep hearing the ring. These are my thoughts. You are much more of a student of economics than I am. I think we all know that the economic destruction that we're seeing is going to ripple out for a very long time. I don't know if it's really a partisan thing. Blame the Democrats or Republicans. They came together in a rescue package very, very quickly. I think they made a lot of mistakes. I hope they remedy those in a fourth rescue package. We've seen way too many layoffs, not enough small business preservation and protection. Layoffs, as you know, beget more layoffs, and they ripple through the supply chain. They take away people's insurance and benefits, and they cause great anxiety and devastation. And I think that was probably should have been the instinct and the goal when they sat down to do the initial rescue packages. So I hope, like I said, that can be remedied. In terms of stay at home and social distancing, I know the government shouldn't be able to lock the nation down, but it certainly should encourage the 8 remaining governors who have not issued shelter in place to do so as soon as possible. The longer everyone is out getting infected, the longer all of us have to stay home, and the more economic devastation we're going to see as a result. So I really think it's a mistake to have not done this sooner and recommended it to all the governors in every state. So that's my thought on watching the health balance, the health versus economy balance. And I think if you look at the polling, it's really fascinating, Jimmy, to see how many Americans actually believe we have to protect our health and safety now in more dramatic ways and get to the economic repair later. And I think that's because as they see this hit their communities and hit their local hospitals, they're really worried about how long the infection explosion is going to last and how many deaths it will produce. They know that the sooner that we protect ourselves, the sooner we can protect the economy. And I was surprised to see that bear out in polling as soon as we did, but it's 3 in 4 Americans or more at this point.
Interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about the political dynamics in play. B Stoddard, our guest, again, associate editor at RealClearPolitics. Cut 3, we have Joe Biden yesterday talking about the timeline for the Democratic primary, which is still going on. Bernie Sanders still in the race, still trying to become the nominee for the Democratic Party. And also in this clip, you'll hear Biden talk a little bit about what is possible for the Democratic National Convention later this year.
Finally, sir, I want to turn to some politics before we go. As you know, Wisconsin now having its primary on Tuesday. Your opponent, Senator Sanders, has said that should be put off, and the governor now joined that chorus as well. But it looks like it's going to happen. Is that wise?
Well, look, I think they should just follow the science. What I've been hearing, I've been following like you have, like everybody has, watching the court action is still in court now. But I think whatever the science says is what we should do.
And does that hold for the convention as well? Are you open to the
Yes.
idea that it just may not be possible to do the convention in August?
Well, we're going to have to do a convention, may have to do a virtual convention. I think we should be thinking about that right now. The idea of holding a convention is going to be necessary, but we may not be able to put 10, 20, 30,000 people in one place, and that's very possible. Again, let's see where it is. What we do between now and then is going to dictate a lot of that as well. But my point is that I think you just got to follow the science, listen to the experts, listen to the Faucis of the world. And if that's the case, it's the case. But we cannot let this, we've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health.
I'd like you to respond to your thoughts on all of what he said there, A.B. Stoddard. But one thing that comes to mind, though, is that he says, follow the science. We should follow the science. Well, a leader, first of all, would say, here's what the science is telling me. Here's what I think we should do. Because to be frank, and I said this earlier in the show, the science is only as good as those who are interpreting the science, and then how it is actually put to use. It's not something where a scientist can just say, hey, this is happening, because policymakers actually have to make decisions. Yet Joe Biden wasn't willing to stake claim one way or the other on the Wisconsin primary and so forth. So with that in mind as well, what did you make of it?
Right. Well, I'm actually really outraged that the Wisconsin primary is happening tomorrow and there's going to be in-person voting. It's incredibly irresponsible. It could have been delayed like the others to a point where we could get away from the curve of infection or, to a mail-in system. It's ridiculous. And I understand why candidates for president don't want to offend state parties and they don't want to say things like I just did. But I think the vice president is correct that a virtual convention is what both parties really should be planning for, in that this could still, without a national lockdown, be rippling through communities and places and be easily transmitted in August in huge arenas. We have a real potent problem with this virus and this outbreak in asymptomatic transmission, and that now I heard this morning they believe up to 50% of people carrying it are not showing symptoms, not, the odd person 1 in 15 or something. And the idea that people are walking around able to infect people who are vulnerable is still really dangerous. And so when you listen to Dr. Fauci talk about the virus returning later, before we have a vaccine online, before we have therapeutic remedies to lessen the effects of the virus, still needing, ventilators and acute care, I think it's obviously a no-go, and that they would have one in August. He's saying listen to the science, meaning listen to what the experts are saying then. I guess he means in July or whenever they're going to make this decision. The president has not canceled the Republican National Convention, nor has the RNC, and they're going to have to weigh in on this question at some point too. But from here, from what we've seen in the last month, it sure seems like it's not possible.
Final question, A.B. Stoddard, before we let you go. I really appreciate your time today. You mentioned mail-in ballots. So on Friday, I asked former Colorado Secretary of State Wayne Williams to come on the show and talk about the pros and cons of switching over to all-mail ballots. Colorado was the third state to implement all-mail balloting. Now, people can still go and vote at vote centers and what have you, but we were the third after Washington and Oregon. And it seems to me that it's really difficult, except maybe expanding absentee balloting. That could be the way to do it in the short run. But to expect these states to be able to successfully implement secure, mail-focused balloting in a short span of time by the 2020 election in November, let alone for those states that have primaries in the next few months. So how quickly do you think we could actually make such a switch?
Okay, so I lost part of your audio, but I heard the end. And essentially, the experts that I have interviewed on this, and they're not many, and this is also new, obviously there's a real push to change the general election to all mail-in. Many states already have it. They have their systems up and running. Transitioning, though, as you point out, from a non-mail-in state to all mail-in is really difficult. And what they're saying to me about the timing is if it's not done by the end of May, it might not be possible to do it. There's a whole chain of events that have to happen. You have to make sure all your addresses are still good, that the voters are educated, that they will be mailing in their ballots, and that they will be expected to sign in the proper place, make sure they've filled it out correctly. In the pandemic emergency, are they actually even living at home? Maybe they've gone to a significant other's residents for the foreseeable future. Will they be picking up their mail? That's the problem with transitioning during the primary season. So getting these systems in place is getting everything printed, changing some laws. I think Connecticut's constitution currently wouldn't permit it. There's a lot of red tape. But I think that our democracy really depends on a full-throated bipartisan effort in this direction. And I think it's really beyond disappointing. It's disturbing to see Republicans attempting to block this in certain places, and the president saying that it would incite cheating. We have hackable system right now that, any system connected to the internet is hackable. So our system now is not safe. Mail-in is going to ensure that we get enough of a turnout in this election, Jimmy, that we don't end up with a low turnout election where people were afraid to be in public places getting infected, and a turnout that is so pitiful that people disregard the result and don't see it as credible. That's a worst case scenario. I think we should all get together to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, I'll say this, that when we first switched over here in Colorado, where we're broadcasting from, to mail-in ballot state, becoming that kind of a state, we had built up over time, more and more people were wanting ballots at home, and then it was, okay, let's just do this carte blanche to everybody. And I had some of those concerns, like voter fraud and whatnot. I think for the most part that's been alleviated, that the system can be done if you have the time to do it, though, and you put all the security in place and have those systems that have worked in other states work well in your state and apply them. I think it can be done, and I would encourage it if it's possible in particular states logistically to make that switch. The challenge, though, is in being able to make the switch in a short span of time, as we were talking about. But I'm not opposed to the idea here in Colorado anymore. I think it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, where it's worked well, it's paved the way that this is a system we should embrace in a time of crisis, in an outbreak where the public health is at stake. As you said, it's going to take time, but we could overcome the time crunch with the proper resources and the political will, and it's just going to take both parties taking it much more seriously to get it done.
B Stoddard, Associate Editor at RealClearPolitics. It's always so great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us,
Great
and
to
I
talk.
hope you're doing well, and I hope you stay well and healthy.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, B Stoddard joining us from RealClearPolitics here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. It's always great to check in with AB. She is a very thoughtful person, and I appreciate her perspective.